whenever I can start.
Okay, I'm hooking up to YouTube Live right now. It just takes a little while to link the live stream. All right. And is this something that do you need participants to teach this lesson, or?
I not really, no.
Okay.
I'm just gonna go through the material then.
Yeah. Okay. Good deal. All right.
Yeah, and if so, I'll just have Sean.
What was that?
I said if I need participants, Sean can be my participant.
Yeah.
Yeah, good morning.
Yeah. What's going on, Sean? Okay.
Okay, I guess I'll get started.
All right. I'm gonna make you the host. You are the host.
Okay. Okay. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, so welcome to the CS Fundamentals. Today we're going to be talking about game programming in Python. Yeah, so we'll get started. So these are the different steps that we're going to be talking about throughout the lesson. The first step is going to be where we try and install Python. We're going to learn the Python basics. We're going to start our Python game, and then we're going to complete our game. So although you might not know what Python is, today we're going to be learning about it. So hopefully you can enjoy creating this game and learn a little bit about Python. So I guess we'll dive right deep into it. So we're going to talk about how to install Python. So I'm going to assume everybody who's here is going to be running Windows. So if you have a Windows computer, what you need to do is open a command prompt and type Python. If you don't have Python installed, you'll have a pop-up that says install. So I'm going to show you how that works. So if you go here down to the bottom left, you can type command prompt, enter, and you can type Python. As you see here, when I type Python, I had this script, this text that says Python 3.9.7. This shows that I have Python installed on my computer. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of the Python program, typing exit with open and close parentheses. This will be different for you if you don't have Python installed. If you don't have Python installed, you'll just click install on the link that's there. To make our game and to learn Python, we're also going to be needing a text editor. Today, we're going to be using a text editor called Sublime Text. So if you go to your Google search, you can type Sublime Text. You go to the first link, Sublime Text. You can go and click this download for Windows. Once you download the Sublime Text Editor, you should be ready. So just to show you, this is what the Sublime Text Editor looks like. If you go down to the search bar, we'll type Sublime. You can see here, this is our text editor. So we'll be using this special text editor just because it's going to show us the different Python syntax and highlight what we need to know. Okay, so that's the basics for installing Python. We'll get into what Python actually is and what you can do with Python, the programming language. So as we learn the Python basics, you're going to learn 4 different things in Python. There's this thing called variables, if statements, loops, and functions. I'm going to show you what those mean here when we look through when we try and make some Python code. So in order to make Python code, you're going to want to create a new file with Sublime Text. So just like we talked about before, you're going to type Sublime Text here in the editor. you're going to create a new file and save it, typing save as, move to where you want. So in our case, it's going to be the desktop, and we're going to name it example.py. The ending py means that this is going to be a Python file. But just like you see here, this is a Python file. So if we type a very simple thing in our Python script, we can type print, meaning print to the screen, hello world. So this is a very basic Python script. If we save it and run it, we will see a hello world. Now, when we run the script, it's going to stop for us. It's going to run and close for us. So one way to get around that is to type command prompt again. Right here, we're in the Emily folder. We're going to type cd desktop. What this means is now we're in the desktop folder, and we're going to type python example.py. So this is how you actually run code. Right? So it's kind of a weird thing. How do you run code? Right? The computer, what it's doing is it's going through each line here and executing a command. So in this case, we're just printing hello world. So hopefully this makes sense, because we're going to continue on with variables. Yeah, so the first thing we're going to learn about are variables. So in Python, there are really three different types of variables. Now you might be wondering, what is a type? So types are different ways that variables can interact. So for example, if you're trying to teach a computer how to do certain things in the real world, you'd need certain types. So one type that a computer is very good at is a type called Boolean. A Boolean is just a true or false value. If you ask a question like, is the sky blue? That's a true value. Or if you ask a question, is the grass red? That's a false value. So here in Python, we're going to describe these variables using specific Boolean values. So for example, we could say is grass red? We can assign that a value of false, right? And in Python, the way variables assign values is the value on the right side of this single equal side gets assigned the value. The variable on the left side gets assigned the value on the right. Right? So now, if we go ahead and print our variable, printing is going to print what? It's going to print false. Right? So if we go back to our command prompt and run the example again, it's going to return false for us. So this is a very simple variable that we're going to store for value, for Booleans. Now variables can hold any sort of contents. So for example, you could think a computer might want to know, if you want to make your computer do your math homework, it'd probably be good if your computer knew how to read numbers, right? So similar to what we had here, let's say we want to say our new variable name is going to be like X, right? What we want to do is assign it a number. So we would say X is going to be equal to, let's say it's 10. Okay. So now if we go and print X, you're going to see it print false and then print 10. Okay. So this is the basics behind assigning values to variables. Right. one other type. So this right here, this type that we just described right here of numbers, those are called integers. Right? Now you should be familiar with that. The last type that we're going to be concerned with are called strings. Now you might be wondering, okay, string is a weird word. Why would we have strings? A string in computer science is just text of characters. So if we said like greeting text, we can set this equal to hello, Sean. And right here, if we print greeting text, when we run the Python file, example.py, we print false. This is what print gave us. X, the value of X, which is 10, and hello, Sean, which is what the greeting text is. So now if we change this hello, Sean to hello, Emilio, you could expect our Python file now to show hello, Emilio. Okay. So Python files, in Python files, your variables can be changed at any time. So what does that mean? Maybe at the very beginning, we want to say, hello, Emilio. But then later on, we want to tell the computer, hello, Sean. So one thing we could do is set greeting text back to hello, Sean. So what does this mean? This means the greeting text is going to store this value, this string value, hello, Emilio. The computer is going to go here, print false, because that's what isGrassRed equals to. Print X, which is the value 10, and greeting text, which is hello, Emilio. Now, if we, on line 15 here, if we type greeting text, we can see here that we're now setting it to store the value hello, Sean. So if we go down here and print greeting text, we can say, and we run this, you can see that we say hello, Emilio, and then hello, Sean. And why might this be useful? So we could create new variables for any kind of object, but you would think, if you want to have one greeting text, or if you want to greet different people, you don't want to have, if you want to greet 1 million people, you don't want to have 1 million variables. So variables are just a way of saying you want to reassign different values to this one greeting text name. So this is really the basics of variables. And then we can go into the next part. So with variables completed, we just talked about Boolean, integer, and string type variables. Now you might not still know really what this means, but we're just going to move on, right? I think if you just kind of go through our examples, you should be pretty familiar, with Python syntax at the end of our discussion. So the next thing we're going to learn about are these things called if statements. So what does this mean? So if we look at our code, it might be interesting, it might be useful to say, okay, if the person you're talking to is Sean, then say hi, Sean. But if the person you're talking to is Emilio, say hi, Emilio. Now, right now, the computer is looking at this text file and running every single command. Right, so on line 9, the isGrassRed is being set to false. X is being set to 10, and greeting text is set to hello, Emilio. Then on line 13, 14, and 15, we print the variables. Right, so in Python, it's very useful if you can edit the flow of what's being run by the computer. Now, what does it mean, flow? That's simply how the computer runs your program. So the first way we're going to learn about how a computer manages flow is with if statements. So if you type if true, colon, what this means is if this value is true, which it is, because it's true, we can say print this value is true. So now if we run our Python script, you can see we print now this value is true. So why is that useful, right? You know, let's see what happens if we set this value to false. Okay, if we look at this file, the computer is going to say is false. Is this value true? Well, no, it's false, right? If this value is true, then we would print this value is true. But now if we run the file, we do not print this value is true. So this is really useful in combined with variables, because maybe you can set these variables, this value right here, to be a variable. So in if statements, you have to assign values that are true or false. So just like we talked about before, the types have to be Boolean types. So in this example, if we say if is grass red, we can say if the grass is red, then we're going to print this value is true. So now we can say, when we run this program, we know that this grass isn't red, so we don't print this value. Okay, so this is pretty useful because now we can assign variables to these, Boolean values to these variables. And let's say later on, we say in a different world, is grass red is now true. So grass is going to be red now. If we run this program, this value is true, is red. So this means that the computer looked at what is grass red has. So just like we described above, it now prints true. The only other flow that a computer needs are two different things. So we have an if statement and an else statement. An if statement says, okay, if grass is grass red, if this is false, then we're going to maybe look to see at the next value. So we'll say if is grass is red, we're going to print this is true. But let's say maybe is sky blue. This is true. We know that the grass is not red, so this is going to be false. And then we'll say else if is sky blue. We'll say print yes, sky is blue. And then if it's not, we'll say print both are false. So what does this mean? If the grass is red, we're going to print the value is true, right? But if the grass is red, if the grass isn't red, we'll then check to see if the sky is blue. Now, if this value for is grass red is false, and this value for is sky blue is also false, then we'll finally print this value, right? So now if we run this, why do we see yes, sky is blue? Well, that makes sense. If the grass is red, we're not going to print this line 25. But because the sky is blue, right? If is sky is blue, if true, if this is true, which it is, we're going to print yes, sky is blue. So what kind of combination would make both of these false? Well, obviously, if both of these are false. Right, so if both of these are false, then we would print both are false. So now if we go to our example, we can see that both are false. So here is where we learn about if statements. Okay. So now we're 2 done. 2 out of 4 done. Okay, the next thing we're going to learn about are these things called loops. Now, I mean, the only loops that you guys probably know about are like hula hoop loops or circular loops. But loops in computer science talk about how you can run code multiple times. So what do you mean run code multiple times? So let's say we want to type print hello. Right? If we type print hello, we want to print it once. Okay, but what if we want to print it 5 times? Okay, maybe we can just go and copy and paste and print it 5 times. Okay, that works. But now what if we want to print it 100 times? It seemed pretty annoying if you have to copy and paste this 100 times. Maybe not so much, maybe you copy paste it and copy paste it and copy paste it again until you get 100 times. That, I mean, what if you want to do 101? Maybe you have to read the amount of lines that are there. So now we're going to learn about this thing called loops. So loops are very useful in combination with variables, specifically Boolean variables. So we can say, let's say this value I is going to be equal to 0. So now if we print I, we can say I starts at, and print the value of I. So what we should see is I starts at what? Should start at value 0, right? Because I has value 0. So if we run this, we can see I starts at 0. So we'll say while. So this is the first loop we're learning about, is the while loop. What the while loop says is while Boolean value run code. So what does this mean? We can have a Boolean value that says, let's say I is less than 10. Okay, well, how is this a Boolean value? I thought Boolean values had to be variables. Well, yeah, this is definitely a Boolean value. You can say, is the number 0 less than 10? Is there a maybe? Well, no. I mean, either I, this variable I is less than 10 or it's greater than 10. There is no maybe the I is less than 10. So if this value for I is less than 10, we're going to run this code. But if not, we're going to exit the loop. So what does this mean? If we say right here, where we run the code, maybe we'll say print hello, right? We want to print it 10 times. But at the very end, we'll say print end loop. So if we look here, if I is less than 10, we're going to print hello. But if it's not, we're going to exit the loop and then print end loop. Now this looks good, but we're missing one thing. Our loop is going to run forever, right? Just like if we set is grass red to true, I, which is 0, is 0 less than 10? Yes. Is 0 less than 10? Yes. Because we're not updating or changing the value of I, 0 will always be less than 10. That's for sure. So one thing we need to do is update variable. So what can we say? We can say I is going to be equal to I plus 1. Well, that's weird. What does it mean I is equal to I plus 1? In math, you know that this isn't true. But in computer science, what did we say? The variable on the left side is going to get the value of what's on the right side. So if I is equal to 0, we know that I will now be 0 plus 1. And if I is equal to 10, we know that I is going to be I plus 1. So I will now be 11. So now we can say, okay, while I is less than 10, and at some point I will be greater than 10. But if it's less than 10, we're going to print hello and make I 1 greater than what it is. But if it's greater than or equal to 10, so which it will, now we're going to print end loop, right? Because we're going to exit the loop and move to line 41. So now if we run this example, we can see I starts at 0. We print hello 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we type end loop. So now what if we want to print this 20 times? All we have to do is change this number if I is less than 20 and run the program, and you'll see now we print hello 20 times. So this is very useful because we can run this code inside our loop a bunch of times. I'm going to just really gloss over for loops because they're not going to be too useful here in our program that we're going to describe, or in our game that we're going to make. All right, so a for loop is just going to say for, just like the while loop. We'll say for, and the way a for loop works is we'll say for a variable in, and then we need some sort of thing to go through. So this is called a list. We'll say print So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. Here in our while loop would be really useful if creating a greeting. Print right? Hello there.
Hey, Emilio. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I think Emilio's internet is just being slow right now.
hear me?
It's like coming in and out. I heard you for a second there.
Okay, can you still see my screen?
Yes, can you move your mouse or something? Yeah, I see that.
Okay, can you hear me still?
Yeah, sounds like it's
Okay.
good now.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Okay, good deal.
Okay, so I don't know where you guys left off, but I'm just talking about functions. So a function is this idea where maybe we want to run this code multiple times, right? So let's say we say, hello there, welcome to my store. We have num items in the store. And just like I showed, we print, hello, welcome to my store. We have 10 items in the store. But maybe we want to set this num items to 5 items. So although we could set this num items to 5 and run the code, it's very tedious. And you could imagine if we want to run this 10 times, or it may be in a loop, this wouldn't be useful, or it would be a lot to keep track of. So there's an idea in Python called functions, where we say define, we'll say print store with this thing called the parameter, num items. And what this parameter says is, okay, now instead of printing a variable that's up here, we print this variable num items. A parameter is just a variable. So now if we call beneath the function that we created, we say print store. We call print store with our parameters, or these parentheses in this case, with, let's say, 10. Okay. So what do we see here? Okay, we printed hello there, we welcome to my store. We have num items. Now that's weird. Why are we printing 10 right now? Well, that's because when we called the function print store, we are printing num items. And num items is set to 10 right here. So if you look, this 10 value goes here to num items. And now we print 10 because we're printing, we have num items in the store. So now if we set this value to like 100, you can see now we're printing, we have 100 items in the store. So hopefully this makes sense. One other thing that we need to make sure we talk about variables. Let's say we define num items right here is equal to 100. Right? And let's say we wanted to decrement, or meaning make the value of num items go smaller. Let's say we say num items is equal to num items minus 1. Python is going to yell at us because this num items is called a global, meaning it's not defined here in the function. The only thing you have to say is type global num items. Okay, so now if we say print store with no value in the parameters, because if you look here in the function definition, there's no parameters. There's no item called num parameters or num items. So if we print this, we're going to print 100. Right? But what happens if we print it twice, one after the other? Right? If we look, we're going to call this function. It's going to say, okay, given this num items, we're going to print these lines and then print what? The value of num items, which is 100. And now we can say, okay, now num items is going to be 1 less, or in this case, num items minus 1. So now it's going to be 99. So now when we call it again, we're going to print 99 because this num items, although it says 100 here, the variable was updated right here. So now you can see we have 100 items and now we have 99 items. So that's really the basics of Python right here. Now, just to recap, there are really three basic types that we're at least going to use here in our game for variables. A variable can either have a Boolean, variables can have an integer, meaning x like is equal to 10, or variables can have a string, which is just text. We showed how here in the terminal, we can print these values, false, 10, and hello, Emilio, and we can reassign or update variables. Right, and that's what we showed here in greeting text. We then talked about if statements and just went through how if statements work. Right, if this variable is true, then we'll run this. If this statement here is true, we'll run this yes, sky is blue. But if none of those are true, then else we're going to run this. So just like we showed here, both of these values are false. So that's why we print both are false. And then finally, we talked about loops and functions. So in a loop just runs until this item here is false. So once I is less than 20 is equal to false. So for example, is 20 will not be less than false. Then we'll finally exit the loop. But in the meantime, we're going to run this code. You have code that you run and you're going to update this. So now the last thing we showed were functions, where we can define code that we want to write that's going to run when we say print store. So that's really the basics of Python. And with this basics, we're going to talk about how we can actually create our boxing game. Right. So I don't think we have any questions right now. So I'm gonna just continue getting started. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and make our game, right? It should be that easy, right? No, before we get started, there's just two more things we got to do in order to make our game. We need to install this thing called Pygame, and we need to download the game files. So what does that mean? If we're going to create our boxing game, we need to have the actual pictures of our boxers, right? So the first thing we need to do is install this thing called Pygame. So we're going to be using Pygame in order to run our game, right? Pygame is just going to let us draw our drawings to our screen. It's going to handle our keyboard input, and it's also going to handle our sounds. So what we're going to do is go down to the bottom and type command prompt. And we're going to type pip install Pygame. Right? Now I've already installed Pygame, but this will install it for you. So pip is how you install things in Python, right? So once you installed Python in the earlier stages, you're going to also install pip. But now, because we need this Pygame library, we're going to want this Pygame library. You're going to want to install it using pip. So this is already done. Now the next steps you want is to download assets of our game. So if you go here to assets, I'm going to link this file in our Zoom chat for anyone also watching. These are going to be all the files of our game. So if you see, we've got two players, player 1 and player 2. Their body parts, a heart and some music, our punch, and then our background music. So if I've already gone and taken this and downloaded this. So if we look here, we show this is all we've got, right? We've got our background, our heart, our player, and our punch. I think I need to download one more thing. I think I need to download this background music. Okay. So now we're going to create our project. So we're going to create a new folder on our desktop called boxing game. Right? We're going to create this file on our desktop. Now, when you go to downloads, you downloaded all the assets. So we're going to open our boxing game folder, create a new folder type called assets. And we're going to add all these files in here. Right. So I think I got something a little different, but you're just going to move all these files in here. So if you look, we've got our background, our heart, our player 1, player 2, the player 1 arms, and the player 2 arms. Okay, so now with those 2 steps finished, I think we're ready to start our game. Okay, so starting our game. How do we actually create our game? I mean, you might think, oh, okay, maybe you just, I guess, use variables, maybe, or use loops. We learned about that. But how do we actually create the game? I mean, yes, those basics that we talked about earlier are useful. But in order to create our game, we're going to let Pygame do most of the work. So what does that mean? If we go to our boxing game, we're going to create a new file by typing Sublime Text, file, new file, and we're going to save this doing file, save as in our boxing game, and we're going to name this game.py. So if you see right here, here's our game file. Now, just like I said, we needed Pygame in order to run this. So how are we going to use Pygame? The way we use this Pygame file is we're going to type import Pygame. Right. So I'm just going to go and describe the steps in order to get the game actually running, and I'll explain them here in a second. So the first thing we need to do is initialize or start the Pygame module. So we're going to say pygame.init. Right? And just like you remember, init is a function, and we call the functions using these parameters. Right? There's no parameters in this case, but we call init. Then from here, we need a loop, a game loop. So you can imagine a game loop as just like the loops that we learned about. What are the loops we learned about? The for and the while loop. Right? I said we'd only be using the while loop, but a game loop is going to be a loop where the code that you write is going to run every single time. So we're going to say while true, that this loop will never exit. We could say print hello. And if we ran game, we would print hello as many times as possible, but we don't want to do that. Instead, what we want to do in Pygame, we need to, whenever you load the Pygame file, you need to be able to click the exit symbol. So the way we do this is we're going to say for event in pygame.event. So you're not really going to understand these, but these are just events that happen when Pygame is run. we'll say if event dot type is equal to pygame dot quit. Then we're going to say pygame dot quit. And we're going to say exit 0. This isn't really going to make too much sense, but all this is saying is if you click the X, close the game, right? But what is the game? I mean, the only thing we have right now is this for loop. So one thing that we have to do before we do anything is actually have a screen that you display to. So we're going to say create game screen. The way we do that is we say screen. So this is a variable. Screen is going to be equal to pygame dot display dot set mode, and we're going to use these variables 675 and 450. So what does this mean? Set mode takes this value where this parameter, where the first parameter is going to be how wide a screen is, and the second parameter is going to be how high a screen is. So now before we continue, the last thing we need to do is actually display the screen, right? So we're going to say display screen. So this is where we're just going to say pygame.display.update. So we're telling Pygame to update the screen. So now if we run the game, I think we need to run this in a command prompt. We're going to say cd desktop cd boxing game. We're going to type python game.py. Okay. See, it says module pygame has no attribute event. That was a typo by me. This is event. Now if we run this again, we now have a blank window. So just like I was saying, right here, this is the width of our screen, and this is our height. Let's say we wanted to do 1,000. This should make our game larger. So if we click X, and run it again, now this is a very wide screen. But if we want to, I guess make the height bigger, we could do like 600. This is a way bigger screen. But just for today, we're going to use these values 675 and 450. Okay, so this is going to be our game window. Right, so just to recap, we create this screen. We say if you click the X button, we're going to tell Pygame to quit the game. But if not, you're just going to display the screen. So we're going to type. So if we click X, it closes the game. Okay. So if we go back here, we created our Python file. We set our game loop and the events. But now you might want to display a background. Right, so how do we do that? Well, let's create a background variable. Let's say background. So we'll say background is going to be equal to the image that we have loaded. So if we go here, go to our desktop, our boxing game, our assets, we have this file called background. Right, so how do we get this background loaded onto our screen? Well, we do that by using the pygame load function. Right, so we're going to import the load function from pygame. So we'll say from pygame.image import load. So this is how we're going to load our file. So we're going to say load. Well, what's the name of our file? It's in our assets folder, assets, and it's called background.png, right? Because it's type PNG. Background.png. So now, if we run the game, oh, nothing happened. Well, why didn't this happen? All we're doing right here is we're creating a variable called background, but we're never displaying the background, right? So how do we do this? Well, in Pygame, we say, in Pygame, what we need to do is we need to say screen.blit. So this is a function blit, which is the first parameter is the image. So we want to display this background. I'm going to rename it image, img, background image. And the second parameter is the position. So in traditionally, positions in games goes the X value first and the Y value starting at the top corner. So if we say 0, 0, the game's position is going to be assigned right here. So now if we run the game, we can see, whoa, we've got our background now here. But maybe maybe we want to move the background image over. Let's say 10. We want to move it over 10. We move it over to the right 10. So in other cases, this is just the position. Now, obviously, with position, maybe we want to have a variable. So just like we showed before, variables could be integers. So we just want to update this. But in this case, our background isn't going to move. So we're just going to have the background started at 0, 0. Okay. So that's going to finish us here with starting the game loop, the event, and the background. Right. So, I mean, you have this pretty window with this pretty window, but you obviously want a player. I mean, how good is a game without a player? So just like we loaded the background, we want to create the player. Okay, so we'll say player1 image is equal to load assets player1.png. Right? And just like I talked about before, if we display background image, just because we load it doesn't mean we actually display it. So we're going to display our player1. So we're going to say screen.blit. What are we displaying? Our player1 image at position will start with 0, 0. Okay. If we run this. Oh no. I mean, we see our player right here, but he's very, very small. Well, the way we're going to make him bigger is we're going to use this scale. We're going to scale him up. So what that means is maybe making a smaller image to a bigger image. So just like we imported load, we're going to import scale. So we're going to say from pygame.transform, we're going to import scale. Okay. Now we have this player1 image, but we want to scale him up. So we'll say player1 image is equal to scale our player1 image to the new parameters. So these new, just having done this before, this is how big we're going to make him. Right, so just like we're saying, player1 image is now set to the scaled value of our player1 image. So if we run the game now, we can see he's a lot bigger size. He's much bigger and easier to work with. Okay, so let's work on moving him down kind of here on the boxing arena. Right, so we said the first value here is how far in the X direction or in the width direction. Right, so if we say 0, 0 is here, maybe we want him like more towards the center. Okay, so maybe we say like 150. Okay. Okay, that looks good. That looks pretty centered. But let's say we want him a little lower, right? How would we do that? Well, maybe we do like 200. Okay. Okay, that looks pretty good. He looks pretty good. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. But see, the thing is that we're not really moving him, right? I mean, it would be really useful if we could move him, right? Because as you know, just a picture right here, we could do this in any kind of, you could do this in paint.net. Or yeah, you could do this in Paint. So, you know, it'd be a lot more useful if you could actually move them around. That's the purpose of a game, right? Now, you got to think, if this right here, the screen.lit, takes in a position, we somehow need to have a variable position, right? And what does that mean? That means a variable position means we need to have variables. So if we look here, we load the player, that's great, but now we actually have to handle the key presses. Okay, so what does that mean? Now that's kind of a crazy thing to say, but when you play a game, you've got to press the keyboard, right? Well, when you press the keyboard, you'll say, we're going to create this variable keys. Okay, keys is going to equal to this Pygame object, pygame.key.get pressed. Here we're going to see which keys are actually pressed. So we're going to say find which keys are pressed. Well, this isn't too useful. Maybe we print keys. Okay, we'll print keys. What does this mean? Okay, if we run the game, oh man, I'm clicking keys right now and these are changing, but this is a lot of text. Okay, this is a lot of text. The way we find out which keys are pressed, the way we find out which specific keys are pressed is we use if statements. So just like we described above, you know, let's say we say if key. Now, what key do we want to get pressed? Let's say the D key. So the player, the left player, at least player 1, he should move with the A and the D key, right? So let's say if the key pressed is pygame.key D, so the D key, we're going to print D is pressed. Okay, now if we run this game, I'm going to click D, and we have now this printed. Okay, so now we know that the D key is pressed. But you could also do another if statement, if keys of pygame.key of A is pressed. We're going to print A is pressed. Right, so now if we run the game, I'm going to click D, and D is pressed. And I'm going to click A, and A is pressed. You can see now we know how to figure out which keys are pressed. I mean, but that's only half the problem. We know which keys are pressed. we know which keys are pressed, but we don't have any way to move the player, right? So in moving the player, let's say if D is pressed, we need to have some variable for the player's position. So we'll say player 1x is equal to 150, right? So we set the variable here to 150. So if we replace this with the variable player 1x, our guy should be at the same place. Okay, well, which he is. But let's say if the D key is pressed, we'll say player 1x is equal to player 1x plus 1. Okay, well, what does this mean? Now, if the D key is pressed, we're going to make our x value of our player bigger. So if we run the game now, when I click the D key, he's going to move forward. Whoa. Uh-oh. We've got a problem. Our player can move outside the bounds. Before we tackle that problem, let's just implement him clicking the A key. So if we click the backwards key, we'll say player 1x is equal to player 1x minus 1. So now we have the ability to move our player back and forth. So whoa, that's cool. That's really cool. So we just figured out how to move the player. Okay. But we've got one other problem. Right, we said that the player can't go out of this range. Right? Well, one thing we're going to say now is, let's say the player's value shouldn't go before, I don't know, somewhere here in the X. So if it is, we're not going to move him. But maybe if it is, we're also going to, but if he's also past this value, we're going to move him. So what does this mean? We're going to say if player 1x is greater than, let's say, we'll say it's like 120. I think 120 is about right here. So if he's greater than 120 and player 1x is less than, I think 530 is about right here, 530. So if he's within this range, then we will actually move him. But if, let's say, he's behind here, we won't move him forward. So what does this mean? We're going to keep moving him forward. Oh, why does he stop? Well, his x value right here has to be about 530. But if 500, if our value is greater than 530, this is false. This if statement is false. And like we said, if the if statement is false, we're not going to make him go further. Right? So similar to the D key, if similar to the D key, if we're moving backwards, if our player position is greater than 120, so if he's above between this range here on the screen, then we can move him forward or backwards. But if he's before, we're not going to move him at all. So this is really good, right? This is really good because now he doesn't move to this side. But just like we showed here, I had to copy and paste this if statement. So it'd be really good if we can make this into a function. And you might not really see now, but why it'd be useful. But I'm going to show you how later on, having this in a function is going to make it a whole lot easier. So we're going to name a new function, define our function, move player 1. And what are we going to take? We're going to take a distance. And we're going to move him. So a distance, let's say our position right now is 100. Well, let's say we want to move him forward 2. So our distance would be 2. We'll say new position is going to equal to player 1x plus the distance. And so if we want to move him backwards, our distance would be negative, right? So meaning our new position would be behind x. But we'll say if not the player 1x, but if the new position is within our range, then we'll update player 1x is equal to new position. So just like I told you before, because we're updating this player 1, which is a global, we have to type global player 1x. Okay, so now if we wanted to use this function, all we have to do is type this. We're going to move our player 1, let's say 1. But now we move this one -1, meaning move it backwards. Uh-oh. It says player 1 reference before assignment. Oops, I renamed it wrong. So now we can move them forward and backwards without hitting the wall. That's great. Okay. So we just talked about how to understand key presses, moving the player, and restricting his player movement. But just because this is a boxing game, we somehow need to actually be able to punch, right? I mean, how's a boxing game going to work if we can't punch, right? So I have loaded in 2 pictures. One called player 1 hit and player 1 ready. So we're going to load these images up. So how do we do that? Similar to here, we'll say player 1 ready, player 1 ready image is equal to load. What are we loading? Assets, player 1 ready.png. And then let's go ahead and display that. So let's say, display player 1 arms. Now we want to keep this attached to the player, right? If we set this equal to 0, or let's say we set it equal to 150, what's going to happen? Oh, red. I typed it wrong. Red D. Right? We see the arm where? Oh, I didn't display it. I'm sorry. Player 1 ready image. Oh man, he's right there. The tiny little arm is right there. But see, he doesn't move with the player. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to resize the image. So how do we do that? We'll say player 1 ready image is equal to scale player 1 ready image. And we're going to scale that up. And I think I'm going to rename it. This is going to be the arm, the ready arm. Is ready arm. We're going to scale this up to 42, 30. These are just values that I've found myself. So if you look here, now the arm looks pretty good. It looks pretty proportional to the body. But see, he also still doesn't move with us, right? So we need to update these values a little bit. Before we do, I think it'd look a little, later on we can show, it might look a little nicer if the arm is also a little rotated. But we'll do this a little later. So we know that if we want to follow our player, we should have the variable player 1x. And if we use the player 1x, he now moves. Now this looks a little looks a little weird. So let's maybe move the arm down. Well, how do we move the arm down? The arm takes a y value, right? And if, like I said, the coordinates go bigger as you move down. So let's maybe set this to 215. Okay. Maybe a little more. Okay, let's say 230. Okay, that looks good. I think that looks pretty good. I think we should rotate it though. Maybe we'll rotate the arm. So how do we rotate? Well, we already imported scale. We're going to rotate, import rotate. Here from pygame.transform. So now the only thing we need to do is we're going to say now the arm is going to be a rotate of the player one ready arm. But instead of a position that we scale it to, or a size that we scale it to, we're going to have a degree, an angle that we rotate it by. So the angle that we're going to rotate this arm by is just going to be 45 degrees. We look now, that looks a little weird. So we rotated it and it looked good before, but now we need to move it down or move the arm back up. So maybe 215. Let's check. Okay, so I think that looks good. Our player moves, and he has an arm, a ready arm. But you know, just like a boxing game, we need a boxing arm. Okay, so let's go ahead and load this arm. Player one boxing arm, or we'll call it a punching arm. To load assets, player one, and I think it's called hit.png. Let's go back to our files and see what it's called. It's called player one hit.png. Okay, we know we're going to need to scale this, right? And we're going to scale this not by 42 and 30, but just from what I've done before, it's going to be 30 and 21. And then we want to display it as well. Okay, and this is going to be the punch arm. So we have two arms. I think that's going to be okay for now, just to show where the position is. But maybe let's move the arm, the punching arm, down a little bit, just so it looks a little better. So I think, maybe we do like this one is 230. And I think we might want to move the arm up a little bit forward. So we'll do like maybe +5. Okay, I think that position looked pretty good, right? So what did I do just here? I moved it down by increasing the y value, so meaning moving it down this way. And I moved it forward by 5, right? But we still want to keep the player as x because, we still want to move with the player. But just relative to the player, we want to move it forward like 5. So that's what this looks like. Right, it looked kind of weird because we had the ready and the punching arm. So how do we do this? Maybe we want to have a Boolean that says, player one hitting. And this is a Boolean. We'll say, let's say that he is hitting. So that's true. We'll say right here, if player one hitting, well, we want to play his, I think we should name it punching. Yeah, you're right. Punching. If he's punching, we want to display his punching arm. Player one punching. Okay, so if he's punching, we want to display his punching arm. But now, else, if he's not hitting, or if he's not punching, then we want to display his ready arm. So if we look now, let's see. Punching arm, player 1 is punching, true. If he is punching, yes, we're going to display his punching arm. So what should we do? We should be displaying his punching arm. Oh yeah, there we go. This is punching arm. But if we set this value to false, he's displaying his ready arm. So it might be useful if we have this, let's say if we click space, that this value of punching is set. So how do we do this? We'll say if keys pygame dot k space, I think that's what it's called. We'll say player 1 punching is equal to true. Else, so if he's not clicking space, player 1 punching is equal to false. So does it say if clicking space punch else ready? Okay, so I think it might be better if we start this off with false. And now, if we click space, oh yeah, there we go. He's punching all right. Okay. Okay, that looks good, right? Before we finish the first player, we added the punching animation. Let's just add a sound. So let's say anytime you click the space bar, right? Anytime you click the space bar, you go ahead and anytime you click the space bar, you go ahead and play a sound that's like ugh or like punch. Right, so I have one of these assets here called punch. I think this is a .wav file, WAV. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, just like loading and displaying one of these items, we need to go ahead and load the sound. In order to load the sound, we need to import this thing called Mixer. So we'll say from Pygame, import Mixer. Okay, well, what is Mixer? Mixer is just another module that we need to initialize. So mixer.init. I'm going to call the function init on Mixer. Then from here, we need to actually load the sound. So we'll say load punch sound. So the way we do that, it was just create a variable called punch sound. It's equal to mixer.sound assets punch.wave. So all this is doing is loading the sound. Just like we loaded these images, they're not going to happen if they're not going to play unless we actually do something. So although it would be good once you click the space to do the sound, that's going to be problematic. Right? If every time you're holding the space, we're going to play this punch sound, well, that's not good. So one thing we want to say is if player punching is false, so if we were not punching before, but now we're punching, we're now going to play the sound of the punch sound. So we're going to say mixer.sound.play punch sound. So now if we run our game, anytime you click punch, it plays the punch sound. Now, Will, I don't know if you guys can hear my sound, the sound on my screen. Can you guys hear that?
No, I can't hear it. There is a way to share your computer audio also. I don't know what that is.
Okay, I think I got it. Can you hear this now?
Yeah,
Is that too loud?
maybe a little bit.
Okay. How's this?
Still, I think the same volume, maybe.
Is that the same volume?
Yeah,
Okay, well,
it's
maybe.
fine though.
Well, let's just do this real quick. How's this?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Hopefully it stays. Okay. Yeah, so as you see, now anytime you punch, you can hear the punching sound. Okay. So now that's really it for the player one. For player one. I mean, now you have a game where you see the first player, he can go and punch, and he can move around. So, I mean, it's not really a two-player game if you don't have two players, right? So, you know, I guess to finish the game, we have to do a few things. You know, we have to add the players. We have to restrict, right? You would think if there's a player right here, that they shouldn't be able to cross each other, right? Unless like you wanted to implement some way of like them turning. I don't think that's too necessary. When they punch, they you know, shouldn't hit each other, or they should hit each other and maybe have some lives. Yeah, and if they have lives, maybe decrement them. Yeah, maybe add some background music and finish the game. So, I mean, real similar. It would be pretty useful if you want to, you know, look at this code later. It would be probably pretty useful if you made this player into an object, right? But I think for the for this example, we don't really need to. So one thing we're going to do is we're just going to copy the code for player one. Into player two. Okay, and I'm just going to make changes. So we know that this is going to be player two's image. We're going to take it from player two. We're going to have the same scale at the same size. Now, player two's ready arm is going to be scaled the same way, but if we try to display it, you know, I'll show you this is going to need to be negative. And now player two's punching arm is also going to be scaled the same thing. So now we have player two's images loaded up. We know that, let's say player two is going to start at position, like, let's say 400. Okay. Well, now we need to display player two. Right, so let's say display player screen.split player two image at player two x. Right? So what does this look like? It looks like this guy right here. Right? Let's add his arms now. Right, so this is going to be player two punching arm at player 2x, and player two ready arm at player 2x, and we want to do this if player two is punching. Right, so for now, we're just going to do player one just so that, you know, if you click the space bar, they're both going to punch. Not that that's useful right now, but oh no, I think we did something a little weird. It needs to be player two punching arm. Oh, we didn't update. So player two's ready arm, player two's hit arm. Okay. That looks a little weird. So see the angle of his arm is a little rotate weird. So we know we're going to need to do this as a negative angle. Right? His ready arm needs to be rotated. We're going to need to move it over, his ready arm over. Right? And I mean, having done this before, we know his ready arm, I think his ready arm is going to need to do -20, and his punching arm should be like minus 35. And then, yeah, okay. Now if we look, it looks a little better. Okay, and then now, instead of using player 2's punching, let's do our player 1's punching. We do if player 2 is punching, and we're going to copy this, like all this code. But let's say we're going to do right. And so the left, now the second player is going to be using the right and the left arrows. And he's also going to be using the enter key in order to punch, or the return key. So if he's not punching, we're going to do this. If we look, if I click return, this guy punches, but if I click space, the left one punches. Now, right now, I'm clicking the left and right arrows, and he's moving the left guy. And that's because we're moving player 1. So we need to go up here and create a new function, move player 2. So we're going to need to know what player 2's x is. New position is player 2, and if it's within the range, then we're going to go ahead and move player 2. Right, so I made this function move player 2, but now we need to call it. And so now if we move player 2, we're going to move player 2 position, and if it's within the range, we're actually going to do it. So now you can see I'm moving the right player, and with A and D, I'm moving the left player. Okay. Now there's one thing that we need to work on. The players shouldn't be able to like cross each other. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to find the distance. We're going to say, if we move player 1, if this is a good position, and this is a good position, and we'll say, and is the width of the player is less than player 2x, then we'll move. So if we look, the left player can't move past the right player. So if we do this, we need to update player 2's movement. Okay, so now we can't move past the right player as a left player. We need to do the same thing. Okay, but instead of new position, we'll say if new position is greater than player 1x plus 30. So I guess maybe we could move this over. Less than new position. So what does this mean? Okay, if the player position is right here, if this value is right here, this value has to be less than what new position is. I think. Okay, so see, they don't move into each other. They don't move past each other. I think that looks good. Okay, let's not get carried away. Okay, so now we have the player punching, or both the players, and we restrict the player. Now we actually have to implement the logic. Okay, so right here, let's just say, let's create a function called handle punch. Right? We'll say, I guess one way that we should think about the game is, let's think about what should happen. Who should get the point? If we both hit, who should get the point? Well, I think it's the first person, right? Because I think if they both hit, the first person should get the point. But until both of them put their arms down, I think it'd be good to wait until you both put your arms down before points can be checked. Now, what does that mean? So the one thing that I don't want to do is I don't want the left player to be able to go like and just win. So the right player should be able to defend himself. So in the case where both of them are up, then you shouldn't get any points. I don't know if this makes sense. Basically, if your arms are like this, you shouldn't just win automatically. That's what I mean. So how are we going to handle the punch? Right? Well, the way we're going to do this is we're going to say if player 2 minus player 1 is less than 40. Let's just print something. We'll just say like print in range. So basically, if they're right here, we should be printing in range. I did not call this handle punch function. We're just gonna, okay. So if we get in the range, we should print. Why is it not? Oh, I didn't call the function. If we get in the range, we should play in range. Okay, good. Let's try that again. In range. So the in range is telling us where, maybe this doesn't count as a punch, but this would because we're in the range. Okay. So if we're in the range right here, what do we have to do? We're going to say if player 1 punching and player 2 punching is equal false. So if player 1 is punching is equal to true. So I mean, this is simple as setting this. If this is true, and we'll say if not, instead of checking this equal to false and not player 2 punching, so this is saying player 1, player 2. Then we're gonna say player print player 1 hit. We'll say if player 2 punching and player 1 punching. We're going to say print player 2 hit player 1. So now let's see this. Okay. Uh-oh, what's going on? Why is it that right here we get this so many times? Well, this is happening so many times because you look, this handle punches is happening all the time. It's happening super fast because this loop is running really fast. So one thing we need to do is we need to handle punches. We need to handle punches and say once we landed a punch, we're going to say we need to reset. Right? I think one thing we could do is just say handle punches here whenever someone actually punches. And right, because this only happens once on the first time, let's show this. Okay. This is false. Then we're gonna play the sound. We're gonna say this is true. I think we can do something like this. So if we go here, this is only going to happen when player 2 first hits player 1. Right? So now we got to do the same thing for player 1. We'll say if it's false, we're going to set it to true. And then we're also going to handle the punch. Okay. So if we go here, even if the right player has his arm out, we make the sound, but we see that the printing doesn't say player 1 hit player 2. But now if the left player hits, player 1 hit player 2, we can do whatever we want. So it's only going to be the case where you win if you hit first, like this. Okay. So how are we going to handle lives? Okay. So one thing we need to do is we need to handle how many lives each player has. So say player 1 lives is equal to 3. And we'll say this is like player 1 hearts is equal to 3. Player 2 has 3 hearts as well. We know we need to load heart. So let's say heart image is equal to load assets heart. I think it's called heart. Heart.png. Heart.png. Right, and just like we had to scale the rest of these, we need to scale this one. Right? So we're going to scale heart image is equal to scale of the heart image 45 by 20 by 39. Okay, this is a heart image. So how do we display this? I think it should be good enough right now if we just display the hearts using a big if statement. So we'll say display. So say if player 2 hearts or player 1 hearts is equal to 3, we want to display. The way we display is screen.blit heart image, and we'll say the heart image is going to be at 10, 10. But because there's 3 hearts, we need to display 3 of them. So I mean, I've done the math before, so they should look right here. So if we look, okay, those hearts look good. Okay, but elif player 1 hearts is equal to 2, we're only going to display the left 2. Say if player 1 hearts is equal to 1, I'm only going to display the left one. So this is how we're going to display it. So let's say we have 2 hearts. Now we're only displaying 2 hearts. Let's say we only have 1 heart. Let's display 1 heart. So we'll go back to 3. And let's go ahead and display the hearts for player 2. Right, so this is going to be player 2. I think the values are a little different. So this is going to be 620. This is going to be 570. This is going to be 520. And we're going to copy these. If you look, now we have 3 hearts for both sides. But now the hearts aren't really doing anything, right? We should have it where if we handle a punch, right, instead of printing player 2 hit player 1, if player 1 if right here, if player 1 hit player 2, we know player 2 hearts is equal to player 2 hearts. Player 2 hearts minus 1. And similar to here, if player 2 hit player 1, we know player 1 lost some hearts, so player 1 hearts. So player 1 hearts minus 1. Now if we look at the game, if I go and punch, it says local variable player 1 reference before assignment. This is because player 1 and player 2 hearts are globals. So say global player 1 hearts, global player 2 hearts. And now we go here, the hearts go down. So that's great. If we look here, we know we implemented a punching logic, we added the hearts overlay, but now we need to do a few more things. When the hearts go down, we should display, game over and who won, and then, maybe add some background music. So I think the background music should be pretty easy. All we'd have to do for the background music is we'll say like music is equal to mixer.music.load assets background. That's a .ogg file. And all we're going to do is we're going to say mixer.music.play. And it's going to take a parameter and we're going to say it's play of -1, which means, okay, we're going to go and loop this. That's what -1 means in this case. So if we play it, you're going to hear our background music. It says assets background music. The specified module could not be found. Let's see. Let's see, background music.ogg. Okay, I don't think we can run OGG files on Windows. Okay, I'll figure this out here in a second. But anyways, whenever we finish the game, right, how do we know when the game is finished? We'll say if player 1 hearts is equal to 0, or player 2 hearts is equal to 0, game over is equal to true. Right, so let's maybe we have a variable up at the top called like game over is equal to false. And if game is over, we don't want to like handle any punching. So we'll say if not game over, and so what does this do? I gotta comment that out right now. If we in the game, our players can't remove the rest of the hearts, right? How does that work? If game over is set to true because someone has 0 hearts, right? This is true. Then we know when we handle punches, if not game over, well, this would be false. So we're not gonna do anything with the hearts. So that's how this works. Okay, but maybe if game over is set, maybe we display like some game over text. So let's, one thing that you can't do is, let's say we need to make a text. We need to load a font. We'll say over font is equal to pygame.font. And we'll do free sans bold, the size of 64. we'll say here, if the game is over, we got to do, the game is over, then we need to create an over text is equal to over font dot render. It gets game over. With some parameters. So this is actually creating the text, and we'll say screen.lit. I think we can create this above here, where the game over text is. We'll say screen.lit over text. And I think I use the variable position 140 and 190. Right. So this, when the game is over, no font, free sans bold. Anyways, I think I have a few assets that I need to load in. So I'm going to do that here real quick, and I'll get back here in a second. Okay. So I just installed this freesansbold.ttf, and then I also recovered the music file. I think this is an MP3. I don't know if we're going to be able to run the music. It says failed loading. Maybe I'm missing something.
It looks
Okay.
like you just couldn't find the MP3 file.
No, it says I need to have this DLL file, Sean. Yeah. See Windows System 32. Is that the Okay, anyways, it's not too big, too important. We still got the other sound playing. But yeah, anyways, I mean, so if we look at the game that we just created, look, now we've got 2 players. Maybe it would be nicer if we had some background music. Right, but let's say, here we go, game over. Right, maybe it'd be useful if we displayed who won or who didn't win. But I mean, I think that might be an exercise for you guys if you wanted to do that. So, I mean, just to recap, you know, over what we did, here we just created a Pi game with the background. We loaded in a sound with a bunch of images that we scaled and rotated if we needed to. We created some functions so we can move the player 1 and player 2 around. And then we created our game loop. If you click the X on your Pi game, we're going to exit the game. But instead, you know, we're going to play the background, display the players, display the players' arms, the number of hearts, and then we're going to do our logic where, you know, if player 1 is moving, we move player 1. If they're hitting, we hit, you know, handle the punching. But now if player 2 is moving, move player 2. If player 2 is punching, and handle player 2, and then actually display the hearts at the very end. So yeah, that's really all I got for the presentation. At least, you know, for the coding side. You guys can always reach out if you need to. Here's my email right here. But yeah.
That was great, Emilio. That was really cool.
Thanks, Will.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording and I'll send you over a copy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I appreciate it. I'll catch up with you later.
Great. Thanks, Will. Bye, Sean. Bye, Ellie.
Yeah.
See ya. Good work.